So this video will show you how to change the rear derailleur cable on a bicycle. So this part here is what's called the rear derailleur of your bicycle, and it basically performs two different main functions. One of the functions that it allows you to shift between the different chain rings on your rear cassette of your bicycle. And the way that it does that is it has these little idler gears which are on this arm here, and it pivots this arm in and out, and the chain is following those idler gears. So when it's, when this arm is in further, then the chain moves from these larger chain rings to the smaller ones. And the other function that a rear derailleur performs is that it's a chain tensioning mechanism, which means that there's a spring which is inside here, which is always pushing this arm so it's going backwards, and it's keeping the chain so it's always at a relatively tight tension. You can see when I put my finger here, I'm pushing against the spring and basically disengaging the chain tensioning mechanism. You can see how loose it gets. However, when I release it, it's always kept there, so it's at a fairly relatively constant tension. So as you can see here, there's a cable which is connected to your rear derailleur, and basically that cable is what controls the position of your rear derailleur. So as you can see on this bike, the derailleur cable comes out the back of the derailleur here. It goes inside of this piece of cable housing, which makes a turn, and then it connects back up with the here with the frame, where the cable is then exposed for a little bit, and then it connects up with this other piece of cable housing, which gets it around this turn here. Which then it becomes exposed again for the top tube of the bike, and then it goes inside another piece of cable housing, which comes up and around through here, which connects with your shifter mechanism, which is what you use for your hand to control what speed you're on your rear derailleur. So there are a few different things which can go wrong with the rear derailleur cable, or for that matter any of the cables on your bike. They are a pretty strong, heavy-duty fiber. However, at the same time, they are kind of delicate as well, because they're made up of a whole bunch of really thin, small fibers, which are all wound together in basically the same way that a rope is made. And unfortunately, if you have something that kind of comes in contact with it and maybe kind of brushes up against it, or maybe you have your bike in the car or something and there's something else sitting up on top of it, it can cause like some sort of a nick in the cable, and it can basically cut one of the fibers, and then what happens is that fiber will start to unravel itself, and there's really no way to fix it after that happens. You're never going to be able to get it all wound back together and mend that that one fiber back together again. So if that happens, you pretty much have to replace your cable. And it's not a huge deal if it's just a little thing here, but as I said, it will get worse over time. And also, if you happen to have it in a spot where it's close to one of the housings, if that little section of cable gets pulled inside of the housing, then the housing is going to cause it to unravel a whole lot more, and it's really just going to cause a big mess. Another reason why you might need to replace your cable is corrosion. As you saw with my bike, there's parts of this cable which are enclosed inside of a piece of cable housing. However, there's also other sections where it's completely exposed to the elements, or to whatever sort of climate or weather conditions that I have my bike exposed to. So if I'm riding in the rain or something and this cable gets wet, it can eventually rust. And that's going to cause a lot of problems as well, particularly again inside of your cable housing. If your cable is all rusty and basically rough on the outside, it's not going to run very smoothly through those pieces of cable housing, and when you're shifting, it's not going to be very convenient to be able to shift between different speeds on your bike. Now, to add to that note about corrosion, if you're in that situation where you have a cable which is kind of rusty on the outside, before you actually replace your cable, I would recommend just lubricating it. You can just use chain lube or oil, or basically whatever you use on your chain you can also use on a cable to lubricate it. So just try and get oil all over the full length of the cable, by taking apart the different sections, and particularly focusing on getting lubrication inside of the parts of the cable which are normally inside of cable housing. In my situation, my rear derailleur cable is actually still in pretty good shape, and I'm really just doing this replacement for demonstration purposes in this video. So I've got my new derailleur cable here, ready to install it on the bike. These really are, relatively inexpensive. I think I got this one for about $3, and you can see it says universal derailleur cable. That's because this can be used for a front derailleur cable or a rear derailleur cable. They're exactly the same cable. You just you just end up cutting off more if it's a front derailleur cable. Now, if your bike is relatively new or you've recently had it serviced at a bike shop, your bike will probably have these little pieces here on the end of the cable, which are called cable ends. All that is a little piece of aluminum which has been crimped onto the end there, which prevents your cable from unraveling. Now on my bike, most of the other cables have cable ends on them. Well, this one doesn't. I'm sure it originally did, but somehow it's fallen off over the years. And you can see, it's already unraveled quite a bit not having it there. Regardless of whether you have a frayed cable like mine is, or the end is actually properly put together with one of those cable ends on it, the procedure is going to be the same. You're going to have to cut off that end of cable, so you're going to be able to pull it back through all the housing there. The best tool that I know of for cutting these, with my experience, is just a pair of side cutters like these. They're fairly simple. They're just a blade like this. And the important thing for the technique of this is to put the end on here, and you're going to want to apply one constant pressure to it, like by using both hands and just pushing really solidly all at once. The reason that I emphasize this is because if you don't push really hard at first, it might not cut through all of the fibers. And by cutting half of it first and then cutting a little bit of it after, it may cause the end to start to fray. This is not too important right now because you have lots of tries at cutting the end here because we're scrapping this cable. But it is really important to note later in the video when we're going to cut the new cable to length, we're going to want to just make one good cut on there. You're not going to have to try a whole bunch of times. So I'll just demonstrate that. So I'm putting both hands on here and I'm just going to push really suddenly, and it's just going to make a solid cut right through. And as you can see, we did get a very good solid cut there. There's nothing fraying at the end. So as you can see here, the cable is actually held to your derailleur by this hex nut here. And basically what it does is by tightening this nut, what you're doing is you're basically pinching the cable in place there, so it's holding it there quite solidly. Sometimes instead of having a hex nut here, you might have an Allen head, so you would use like an Allen key to loosen it off. But in this case, since it's a hex nut, you could just use, for example, an adjustable wrench and get it sized correctly for going onto that nut. In my case, I'm going to use my socket and ratchet handle, and it's a 9mm socket that fits on there. So I'll just put that on there and I'll loosen it off a little bit. Now there's no reason to take this nut all the way off. All you really have to do is just loosen it enough so you'll be able to pull the cable out, which I think I've been able to do here. As you can see, the cable comes right out. So now with that nut removed, you should just be able to pull this piece of cable housing out from the end of your derailleur, and then you can actually just pull that piece of housing off, and then basically just trace your cable all the way up to your front shift lever, and while you're doing it, you're pulling off each piece of cable housing along the way. So once we get to here, we can pull this one off, and then up here, this piece of cable housing will come out, and then you just pull cable housing out from the end. And now the only thing which is connected to your shift mechanism is the actual cable itself. So to replace my cabling, you have to remove this top plate here, and there's just two Phillips screws which I have to loosen off, so I'll be able to take that off. So once you've got those loose, you can just lift this piece off, which will expose the inside of the index shifting system. And then to take the cable out, all you have to do is just push on the cable here, and it should just pop out the end there like that. And you can just kind of guide it so it'll come out. Pull it all the way through. So I've got my brand new cable here, and before I'm going to put it on the bike, I want to make sure I get it nice and well lubricated before I put it inside of the housing. So what I'm going to do, as I said before, you can just use basically any kind of chain lube that you use also will work on a cable. So this is the stuff that I use. It's nothing really special. It's just because bicycle lube. It's from the department store. I think this cost about $3 or $4 to buy this bottle, and it lasts for quite a long time. So the technique that I use for applying it is you just basically just take your cable like this and kind of put it inside of a rag, and then you just kind of just dribble little bits of lube inside of there, and then just pull the rag along and put a few more little driblets, and just make sure you get your cable so it's looking nice and shiny and nice and lubricated. Now at this stage of the game, it's also a good idea to lubricate inside of your cable housings. Now if you remember, we took 3 pieces of cable housing off the bike, so now would be a good point to lubricate inside of here. Now I know we already lubricated a cable, and you know that probably would be enough, but it also helps to get some lube, you know, inside of these tubes, because it's just going to help keep the cable that much more lubricated. It's also going to prevent, if there's, you know, if this is full of fluid, it's going to prevent water and stuff from getting inside of there if you happen to be riding on a rainy day. Now the technique that I use for lubricating inside of here is you just take your same lubricant bottle and you just make a few little drips there, which will go in the end, and you can kind of just see it go down. And then put another drip in. And something that I do to get it, you know, even more dispersed in there is I'll just put my lips around this and just kind of blow on it a little bit, just to help, you know, get it flowing, so it'll go, you know, through the actual inside of the cable housing. So I just, you know, kind of put my lips around it, so I'm not actually touching the actual end where there's lube, because, you know, it doesn't taste very good. And after you do that, then you can flip it over to the other end and just do the same over there with a few little drips there at the end. And again, just blowing on it. And now I'll just repeat the same procedure on the other 2 pieces of cable housing. So now our first step for reassembly is to take the end of the cable which doesn't have an end on it, so this one here, and to thread it right back through the same way that the old one came out. Now it is important to note which position you have the index shifting system in. I'm in the 7th gear right now. However, if I was in a lower gear, that part where the cable goes is actually not as accessible. So it's important to shift this around and make sure you're in a good spot so you're able to put it in. So I'll just push that through the same way that the other one came out. There we go, and now we've got to line it up with this next hole here, which is where it comes out of the mechanism. So there we go. And then just pull it all the way through. And that end should just fit very nicely inside of that gap there. Now we can put our plastic cover back on. Then thread your new cable through all of the pieces of cable housing back the way that it was before. So before I actually reconnect the cable, there's a few adjustments that I want to make, so I'm going to flip the bike over so I can do that. So pretty much every derailleur that I've seen or worked on has 2 of these little screws, and they're usually 2 little screws which are side by side, and they kind of look like this, and they're usually labeled. One of them has an H and the other one has an L. And what they are is they have nothing to do with attaching your derailleur to the bike or tightening or anything like that. What they're called limiter screws, and they're just for making adjustments. What they adjust is how far from side to side the arm of your derailleur can move, when it's moving the chain between all of your different chain rings. For example, you don't want your chain to come too close on this side, because it will get stuck in the gap between your smallest chain ring and the frame there. And on the other end, you don't want your derailleur to go too far this way that it's going to push up against this plastic piece here, or even worse, it's going to make your derailleur run into the spokes here and possibly get caught in the spokes. So you want to make sure you have your limiter screws adjusted correctly before you make any adjustments with the actual cable itself. So since we have no cable on here right now, the spring in the derailleur is pulling the derailleur all the way towards me, so it's sitting in the largest chain ring, which is also known as speed number 7, or the highest speed that the derailleur can be in. So that means we're adjusting the high limiter screw to adjust this. So by tightening it or loosening it, you're going to see this derailleur move from side to side. And what you want to do is you want to look from this angle here and make sure that this chain ring here is lining up perfectly with the chain ring where your chain is on right now. So I'll just demonstrate that. So I'll tighten it a little bit. And you can see with each little turn, the derailleur is moving a little bit that way. And then I'll loosen it back. So as I said, you want to make sure you get this set correctly before you proceed. So I think I've got that sitting in a pretty good position, just like that. Now adjusting your low limiter screw is a little bit more tricky because right now, as I said, with the cable off, the derailleur wants to sit in the high position. However, you can push on your derailleur by pushing on the arm here, and it's going to move the arm that way, as you can see, like that, although it doesn't really want to move very far because the chain's in the way. So you have to pedal the bike at the same time as you're pushing it. So we're just going to pedal like that until we're in the highest chain ring. And right now you can hear that scraping noise. That's the chain rubbing up against this plastic piece. So that means that the low limiter screw is already set incorrectly. So I need to tighten that up a little bit so I can move this in so that it's not going to be touching that, and there's no chance that my derailleur is going to be touching up against the spokes. So with one hand like that, I can be pushing the derailleur all the way in, and then using my other hand, I can adjust this screw here. So by tightening it, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pulling the derailleur towards me. So I'll just, I guess it's kind of hard to see, but if you're in my position, you'd be able to feel the derailleur moving with each turn of the screw. So right like that, it looks like it needs to come in a little bit more, so I'm going to tighten this a little bit more. So just by eyeballing it, I think I've got it pretty much in the right spot, and when I spin the wheel I can tell that it's not rubbing up against the plastic anymore. So another device which you have for making adjustments to your derailleur is this piece here, which is called your barrel adjuster. And what it does is it makes adjustments to the cable. And basically what it does is you can spin it in and out, and what it does is it gets longer. And what that does is it makes your cable housing length basically a little bit longer, which effectively makes your cable behave as if it was actually shorter. So instead of, when you're making adjustments back here, instead of having to tighten and loosen this thing and re-pinch the cable into here, you can instead just make little minor adjustments using the barrel adjuster. So before I put the cable on, I'd like to get the barrel adjuster so that it's in the middle of the range of adjustments that it can make. And the idea behind that is so that I can either make it longer or shorter depending on what little adjustment that I need to make. So I'll just show how it works. So I'll just spin it, and you can see that this end part here will stick out as I turn it. So you can see it's just getting longer and longer. So that's basically the longest you can go. So basically you want to go to about half of that. So I'll just spin it in a few turns. And that's about halfway, I would say. So now I can thread my cable through the barrel adjuster there. And then I'll just put my cable housing so it fits inside the end there. So as I said before, with no cable attached to your derailleur is naturally going to want to go into your smallest chain ring, which represents speed number 7 on this bike. So before we attach the cable, we want to make sure that we have our shift lever so that it's set in the 7 position, so that your shift lever and your derailleur will be synchronized when you attach it together. So I have in fact double checked and verified that I am in my 7th speed position. So before we do anything, we want to make sure we pull all of the slack out of the cable. So just pull firmly on it, and then you can tuck it inside underneath the nut there where your cable gets pinched, just like that. And then to grab it a little bit more firmly, I use a pair of pliers. So I'm just going to put those on there. So now with my left hand, my less dominant hand, pulling on that, I'm just going to put my socket on the end there and tighten it up. And there we go. Now we've got that firmly pinched on there. So now that I've got that firmly attached on there, we're just going to do a little bit of a test and see how we did, see how well it shifts between the different speeds. It's probably not going to be absolutely perfect at the very first try, although you do have this barrel adjuster here, so making small minor adjustments is really, really easy. So I'll just do a little bit of a test and see how well it shifts. So I'm starting in 7, and I'm going to shift this to 6, and then to 5, and then to 4, and gradually on my way up and see how responsive it is. So just by turning the cranks you can do that. So that's the 7, or to 6 from 7, and I can see it lagged a little bit. Let's try another one. That lagged a little bit as well, not too critical. Let's try another one. That's definitely lagging there. There it goes. And lagging a lot, trying to get into number 1. So the fact that it was lagging a little bit basically means that our derailleur is not perfectly synchronized with our shift lever, which is, as I said, very easy to fix just by adjusting your barrel adjuster here. So right now I have my shifter so that's in the number 2 position, and as you can see, this sprocket here is a little bit closer to me than the sprocket on the cassette there. So what we're going to want to do to get them synchronized is we're going to want to move this over, a few millimeters so that it will be perfectly lined up. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to adjust the barrel adjuster. So what we're going to want to effectively do is take a little bit of slack out of our cable, and the way we're going to do that is by using the barrel adjuster and effectively making it longer, which will effectively make the cable shorter. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn this in the direction which is going to make it get longer. So using the right hand rule, we're going to move this out, and that means turning it, in this direction, so it'll go in the direction where my thumb is pointing. So I'm just going to make a few little turns of that. And now just from eyeballing, it looks like this sprocket is a lot more synchronized with that one, so we'll give it another try now. Still lagging a little bit. So now just to demonstrate the other extreme, which might be what you are experiencing with your bike, I've adjusted my barrel adjuster so that it's all the way out. So now my cable effectively is too short. So what it does, instead of lagging when you're going up, it just lags in the other direction. So right now I'm in my largest chain ring, speed number 1, and when I shift down from that to 2, well, that one worked pretty well. We're going to go down to 3, and it's not moving. Let's try moving down from, oh, there it goes. Now we'll go to 4, again, lag, lag. So on a few of those there was some lag there, which can be equally as annoying if it's lagging when you're trying to shift up. So as you can imagine, it takes a little bit of trial and error to get it so that it's set correctly so that it will shift to your satisfaction. I think I've got it so that it's pretty good. If you'll watch, I'm starting in 7, 1 click, I'm in 6, 1 click, I'm in 5, 4, 3, 2. However, I'm having issues with getting it to 1, and that brings on a good point, which is something to be aware of. There's a good chance that if you're having a problem shifting to either your smallest or your largest chain ring, it probably has something to do with your limit adjustment screws that we adjusted earlier. So it's very likely that the reason that we're not able to properly shift into our largest chain ring, or speed number 1, is because our low adjustment screw is adjusted too tightly, so that it means that the derailleur has trouble moving, far enough in that direction so that it's able to get into 1 properly. So I'm just going to make a small adjustment to my low limiter screw here, and hopefully that will allow the derailleur to be able to shift into the large chain ring promptly. So I'm just testing it out again. You can see that very rapidly it's able to shift between all of the gears, going up and going back down again. So now the only thing that's left to deal with is this long piece of cable which is hanging out at the end. So you can use the technique that I already showed to clip off the end using side cutters, and leave maybe 1.5 inches of cable there just in case you need to make some kind of adjustment, or in case it does start to fray so it's not going to get all the way back to there. So just cut her off, just of course putting lots of pressure all of a sudden onto it like that. Now that cut didn't actually turn out that well. It's kind of luck of the draw. Sometimes it turns out really well, other times not so much. But this time we can just kind of twist it together a little bit, and it looks still pretty good like that. So if you want to put one of those aluminum cable ends on there, you can probably pick one up from your local bike shop, and it'll just slide over the end. You can just use a pair of pliers or something just to pinch it on there. However, if you don't already have a cable end and you don't want to go to the trouble of buying one, I'm going to show you the method that I use for sealing the ends of my cables. I think it does a pretty good job of stopping them from unraveling. So all that I use for sealing the ends of my cables is just little strips of duct tape. So I've just cut a little strip of duct tape which is about 1 centimeter in width, and you just basically just wrap it around the end there with a little bit. You want a little bit of the tape overhanging the cable. You want to get it pretty tightly wrapped on there. And when you're done, it should look something like that, which actually surprisingly looks kind of similar to an aluminum cable end. And just to seal things up a little bit better, I like to melt the end a little bit with a lighter. And that just helps it basically kind of bond together with the actual cable inside there. So just let it burn a little bit, then blow it out. And once it cools a little bit, you can kind of mush it together a little bit and just basically pressing it on the cable a little bit better. Once it's completely cool, it'll be pretty much rock hard and it'll just basically form a really good seal on the end of your cable. This concludes my tutorial on how to change the rear derailleur cable on a bicycle. I hope you found this video helpful. I also have a video showing how to do the same task for the front derailleur cable. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.